Welcome to the penultimate session here today now at Grad Ireland Live. Welcome to everyone. In this particular session, Adrian McCarthy, Programme Manager and Senior Recruiter for the For Purpose Graduate Programme, will be chatting to Emma Morgan, Business Analyst for Concern Worldwide, and Emily O'Brien, Marketing and Fundraising Assistant in Blossom Island, about her career in the not-for-profit sector. So as I'm sure you're all aware by now, you can ask questions by putting them in the chat box to the right-hand side of the screen, and you can upvote the questions you want to see answered, and time permitting we'll get to as many of them at the end as we can and put them to all three of the guests. And also there's a poll attached to this seminar, so if you want to have your say and let us know what you think, please do vote on the poll. So that's enough for me, so happy to hand you over now to Adrian, Emma and Emily to take us through their seminar today. Off you go, guys.
Thanks a million, Pierce. So yeah, I suppose firstly, thanks so much for everyone for joining us for the session, and thanks a million to Emma and Emily as well for giving your time to speak to us today about careers in the non-profit sector. I suppose just before we kind of start out, I just want to give a small bit of information about the For Purpose programme. So basically, I'm the Programme Manager of the For Purpose Graduate Programme. And essentially, For Purpose is a grad programme for the non-profit sector. So we work with lots of different types of non-profit organisations, such as Focus Ireland and Sightsavers, as examples of orgs that we've worked with previously. And we provide mentoring and then training throughout the course of the traineeship as well. So Emily is on the For Purpose programme with us in Blossom Ireland as a digital marketing and fundraising assistant. And then Emma is a mentor in the For Purpose programme as well. So delighted to be joined by both of you today to kind of speak about your experiences of a career in the sector and of For Purpose as well. So I suppose, yeah, I suppose we're going to kind of go through a couple of kind of questions today, really, to kind of get a sense of, your careers in the sector and what kind of skills, that people who are thinking of a career in the sector could be developing as well, if they're interested in it. And we'll have some time for Q&A, as Pierce said, towards the end. So I suppose the first thing I kind of want to ask, I suppose, if you could each kind of tell me a bit about your own story, and I suppose why did you choose a career in the non-profit sector, and kind of what kind of got you thinking about it. So I suppose I might go to maybe Emma first, if you want to kick things off.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me, Adrian. So I graduated in 2010 from my undergraduate, and I suppose just around that time I did an arts degree, a joint major in English and art history. And when I had been in school, I was in a Daughters of Charity school, so there was a lot of emphasis on volunteering. I would have done a lot of different volunteer work as a teenager and continued it on. Then I actually linked in with DePaul, Ireland. I did befriending. And then when I was coming to my master's, I really realized, and I'm sure graduates today as well maybe feel this pressure if they're not going into an apprenticeship, that a lot of people feel pressured into the need to get a master's. So in 2010, particularly because of the financial crisis and the fact that I had chosen an arts degree path, and I wasn't really entirely sure what would open up to me. I was very, very passionate about the arts, and I took up a cultural policy and arts management master's, and I started volunteering and then doing reception work in the RHA Art Gallery. And while I was there and looking at my thesis, one of my supervisors was saying, actually you're involved a lot in charity in general, besides actually being involved in the arts, and you do a lot of volunteer work. Your thesis maybe should focus on that. So I thought that was actually a really good idea. And at the same time around the thesis, I was interning at Business to Arts as well. So I had an idea of what the arts sector is like. And the arts sector is actually part of the nonprofit sector as well. They have CHY numbers. So around that time, then I went and I actually interviewed heads of fundraising, chairpersons, other people in the arts sector, and I looked at data relating to fundraising. And then while I was finishing up my internship, I was very, very lucky because I had applied for, I think, 300 jobs in the year. I mean, from waitressing all the way up to everything. And I 2 into 3 and For Purpose wasn't around to approach for that kind of help. So one of the people who worked in Business to Art sent around an email if anyone was interested in part-time work as a fundraiser with the charity alone. I met the CEO, and I actually presented some information from my thesis that I'd met from some of the non-profit bodies. I think 2 and 3, I think fundraising in a cold climate was one of the papers I'd read. And really just from there, he decided pretty much that week that it wasn't going to be a part-time position, that it was going to be a full-time position. And I really got to see everything that was involved in a charity. I was the very first fundraiser that they'd ever had, and I got really good access. And I suppose he kind of told me he was going to take a chance, but what I really deserved as a young person, he felt, even though it's an organization for older people, was to get a seat at the table and to see how a business ran. And then over time I moved into UCD Foundation and then Fighting Blindness, and I have just been very lucky over the years that each place I've worked in has really valued growth and professional development. I really realized that it's a very worthwhile business, and I still volunteer my time. And then since then, I've obviously been very lucky that I've been approached by other charities and now taken a step onto a couple of different boards. And so I find myself actually in the last 2 years changing my career, still in the charity sector, from fundraising into business analysis. So it's skills that I've developed, and I can see some of your questions. You can take them anywhere and you can grow. So I took a very unusual path, thinking I wanted to work maybe in the arts by choosing a vocational master's, but actually ending up in the charity sector. And the charities I'm on the boards of are the arts sector, but it's not what I ever would have thought I would have ended up doing. Yeah, so sorry, probably a few minutes too long there.
That was a really, I suppose, interesting insight into your career and kind of journey into the sector, Emma. And I think some of the things that kind of stood out to me there, just when you were speaking about it, was the voluntary experience that you were kind of building up from, really kind of early on when you were in school even.
Yeah.
And the other kind of thing then was applying for over 300 roles back when you were looking for your first job, I suppose, because some of the things that that I say to people as well who are interested in the sector is to try and build up that voluntary kind of experience.
Yeah.
Really does stand to you in the interview process. And then also, to kind of persevere as well, I suppose, is the other thing, especially when you're looking for your first graduate entry role. It can be hard, and it is hard. But that that you will get there in the end. It's just really a matter of kind of getting through it and getting the applications out.
Yeah.
So I think that was two really interesting kind of points there. And I suppose for yourself, Emily, kind of the same thing. How did you kind of get into the sector, and what kind of sparked your interest to get into it?
Well, a lot like Emma, when I was going to secondary school, especially, I did a lot of volunteering for different organizations, but I always just assumed that would be a separate part of my life to my career. And I went into my undergrad studying media and marketing, and with the intentions of being a cameraman one day. And I suppose as soon as, like, during the 3 years of my undergrad, I started really enjoying the marketing side. And same as Emma again, I felt like there was a pressure to do a master's and to kind of have a bit more of a leverage. So I found a digital marketing master's in IT Carlow then. And, like, I always had an interest in volunteering, but I never really saw a career in it. I suppose I didn't really know anyone who had a career in the sector. I just kind of seen it as something you can volunteer in in your spare time or at the weekends. And then as soon as I finished my master's, I was trying to find a job within marketing sector anywhere. I felt like a lot of the other graduate programs didn't really speak to me. Like, I would have only been doing them for experience and to be able to say that I worked for certain firms in certain sectors. And then I seen the For Purpose program for Blossom Ireland. And as soon as I had read the website, I knew it was, I feel like it's rare sometimes that you actually feel passionate about a job you're going for. And it was the first time I'd seen a job where I was like, if I don't get this, I'll actually be so disappointed. Like, everything else was just kind of, shot in the dark, like, I'll try it. And if I don't, it's fine. And then even when I got through the first and second round of interviews, I was delighted. And I feel like it really stood to me in the end that it came across that I really wanted a job, because I feel like for the other interview processes, I wasn't making the rounds because I didn't really have an interest in it. And I think that was kind of straight off the bat. And And it was funny, even when I was in school and in college, people would always say to me that, you know, I'll end up working for a charity. And I always kind of went, no, like that's just the side gig. It's not like, it's never going to be a career. And I'm just delighted. I think it was very lucky as well to find the For Purpose program when I did. Because like Emma, I was just applying for everything I could see, because I feel like there's such a panic as well to get a job as soon as you finish up college. And yeah, now I'm almost 6 months working in Blossom Ireland and enjoying it. So
great stuff. No, that's great, Emily. And I suppose some of the kind of interesting things there to what you said is how you kind of thought in terms of the charity sector that it wasn't possible to have a career within it. And that's a really common misconception, actually, that, you know, a lot of times when people aren't involved with the sector or don't know a lot about it, people assume that it's voluntary. And that's because mainly when in day-to-day life, when we hear about the sector, we hear about volunteering and we hear about, you know, kind of giving up your time to do that. Whereas like I think, you know, people might not be aware that it is a really, really big sector and a lot of people are working in it. So that was just interesting that to pick up on that. So I suppose I just want to put another question out to you as well. And if you could tell me, I suppose, what are some of the key things that you've learned from working in the sector? So for example, you know, you kind of both touched on the kind of purpose aspect there. So has working in the sector maybe aligned with your own values? What are the challenges that you've faced as well? And then maybe some of the skills that you've developed. So whichever one of you would like to maybe take that question first.
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, okay.
I think, especially with Blossom Ireland, we help young people with intellectual disabilities. And I always grew up around intellectual disabilities. My stepdad, he used to work for different charities. He actually worked in the sector himself, and we were always just surrounded by it. And I felt like I was very aware of, you know, the disadvantaged people are at. And I always felt like I really wanted to help in a way. But like I was saying earlier, I thought it would always kind of be just a voluntary, you know, when I have the time to help. So like it really lined up with my values that way. I think that's why I had such an attachment to Blossom Ireland as soon as I read the website and what they were doing. And especially a lot of the age group would be around the age I am now. And it kind of struck a chord with me that a lot of people who are my age with intellectual disabilities wouldn't get the same opportunities as I would be getting at the moment. Like I found it hard looking for available jobs and, you know, straight from college, everyone's experience. But when you give that extra layer of having an intellectual disability, it must be almost impossible. So I feel like that really aligned with my values. I think some of the key things I've learned, I definitely think communication. And we were always told in college to, you know, for like to have a list of contacts and make sure you're constantly meeting people and engaging with people and making relationships. And I feel like that's been so important in Blossom. Even such things as organizing a raffle, like you have to kind of have the contacts, and a lot of the prizes that we have gained are from contacts that people in Blossom Ireland already know and have already made a connection with in the past or have dealt with in the past. And the same as well with supporting other charities and like supporting each other and building up that way. I think relationships are very, very important. I think that's definitely one of the key things I've learned so far. I didn't realize it would play as much of a role as it has in building and maintaining relationships as well. And yeah.
Great, thanks, Emily. And yourself, Emma?
So there was struggles as well. Was that one of the questions? Or just trying to
challenges?
Challenges,
things
you've learned. Yeah. So I suppose for myself, from working, I've worked in it across a few different organizations. I think the one that strikes me the most is actually working in fighting blindness, and it used to maybe be alone, and like that I have a personal connection. I lived with my grandmother, so that's for older people. But working in fighting blindness, we only had one phone number, so I would answer the phone quite a bit, and you would get through before you'd put people through to the research or counselling service. And it just showed me the breadth and complexity that people go through when they're struggling with an issue like sight loss and the idea of hidden disability. And we would have been part of the Disability Federation of Ireland, but just also seeing the strengths that people have as well. And it just really opened my eyes, I have to say, to disability while I was working there, and just that if it was something that would happen to me, I wouldn't be afraid, if that makes sense. I know it's really unusual, but my people in my family that I wouldn't really know would be affected by sight loss. So it was just a very interesting experience overall, just to meet the clients or the service users. And I think that's something I think that has been really important to me, has been working with service users or clients, whatever you want to call them. And besides concern, I've been able to do that in every charity that I've worked in. The challenges for a role like fundraising, if someone's going into fundraising, it can be very stressful if you're responsible for a target. So I would have been, as the fundraising manager, responsible for the majority of the target, and we only had 10% state funding. So to be honest, that would really play on my mind, because I would know people and I would know if the income wasn't reached. There's two threats: the immediate threat to salaries to cut back on the work, or the threat to the people benefiting from the service. So that can be something, particularly if you're in a small to medium organization. So it wasn't the smallest of organizations. It generated nearly 2 million in some years. But that, if you have a charity and you're fundraising for a target where there's very little public funding, it can be very stressful. The pace of work as well in a smaller organization, and Emily, I'm sure you're finding this as well, that you get thrown various different jobs. Even if you've signed up for one specific job, everywhere that I've worked, my role has mushroomed and grown. That's really good, because it gives you the opportunity to gain far more experience and learn. And the things that I suppose that I've learned, the skills, and this is kind of what I do at different stages of my career. I would have tackled specific skill sets that I wanted to achieve. So at the start, I wanted to understand how specific direct fundraising worked, or reporting. Then I wanted to learn about budgets and things like KPIs and how to set objectives. And then I wanted to learn about strategy. So I've set my own kind of benchmark measures. And what I've also learned in the charity sector, and one of my other colleagues from UCD Foundation would say this as well when we were giving a panel talk, would be, you can reach out to people in the charity sector. Again, Emily, you're talking about your network, but I literally do go onto LinkedIn, or if I go and I meet people at a talk and I find out that we have something in common, or we have a mutual goal that could be achieved, I will ring them, even if they're complete strangers in the UK. I'll ring or I'll email them and ask them for a discussion, and try and find out as much as possible. So to see if my charity that I'm working at the time can have a strategic advantage by adopting new tactics. And apparently in other sectors, it's just not really done. But that's something that's really interesting about the charity sector that you can do.
Great. I think what was really interesting there as well, that both of you mentioned, is that both of you had kind of almost like a personal connection, in terms of kind of voluntary or kind of experiences in your lives, that kind of led you to the sector. And that's often the case as well, where it's something that gets someone thinking about kind of I suppose the work that the sector does and things like that. So I think it's just really interesting to kind of hear that from both of you as well, and that being a point that kind of brought you into it as well. So I suppose I just want to ask now, maybe for grads and students who are interested in working within the nonprofit sector, what advice would you give in terms of what kind of skills should they be developing now? So I might go to yourself maybe first, Emma, for that one.
Yeah, so depending on the role, obviously there's going to be very, very different, and the size of the organization. So depending on the background, but the way that I would look at it now is I would look at things called core competencies, and then, so I mean, varying roles have different kinds of core competencies, but the ones that come up again and again for me as a manager, or when I'm going for a role, will be things like attention to detail, but communication is the best skill that anybody can develop. And there's so many different ways to communicate, and how you manage your communication is really important. things like attention to detail and being proactive, I think, as well. And then one of the other more important things that I would see as well is being able to think critically, which I think you learn in university anyway, but being able on your CV to apply critical skills. So if you've learned a particular theory, that you can demonstrate on your CV how you can put it into action and process into the item that the employers are looking for. And maybe besides maybe internship programs, the very frustrating thing at the moment for graduates is that's the requirement for experience. And I mean, one of my rookie mistakes when I was in university looking for a part-time job was I think I said something, I can learn a lot. Unfortunately, employers, unless they're doing internship or maybe graduate programs, they don't really want you to learn. They want you to be able to demonstrate that you're effective. So again, that you can manage yourself, and that you not only understand the theory, but you have some awareness of the practice. So I think brushing up on real world examples, or that you know the company, or you know other companies that are like this company and things that they have done that have been impressive that you think could be enacted, rather than just quoting, let's say, marketing or fundraising theory at them. Show them how it would work in practice and how you'd be able to deliver on that.
That's great, Emma, and I suppose definitely agree with you on definitely agree with you on the competencies point, because as someone who obviously does a lot of recruiting and I've been in lots and lots of interview panels, competencies are how we assess, people in an interview setting, and that's exactly the kind of skills that you're referring to around communication skills, time management, all those kind of areas, come up time and time again. So just having examples to draw from in the interview process, from your experience is really, really beneficial for those. And yourself, Emma, would you have any, I suppose, advice for people who are looking at the sector and considering getting into it? Or sorry, Emily, I said, I said Emma there.
I definitely agree with Emma in saying communication is a big one, like I was talking about earlier, and also being adaptive and not worrying, like if it's something, if you're asked to do something that you haven't been expected of you, not to freak out, to be able to take it head on and to not be afraid to ask questions and to give everything a try, especially if you're working for a smaller charity. And the biggest thing that I've learned so far since starting at Blossom is, like Em was saying, attention to detail. I think especially during college, you're so used to rushing at deadlines and getting assignments in. And sometimes I would send an assignment and I wouldn't want to look at it again. I'd be happy it's gone. And now, since working for Blossom, I'm working a lot on, reading things 3 or 4 times and making sure the attention to detail is there. Because like you don't want to be corrected numerous times. And I feel like that's something I've had to almost unlearn in my brain, like the whole college mentality of get it done and get it out, like, that you have time, and to just take that extra time to make sure everything's right. And yeah, I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned so far anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made there, because there is definitely a transition from when you're in college and the type of work that you do in college, I suppose, kind of versus then when you're coming into, your first kind of graduate role. There's a complete transition, I suppose, in the pace of work and kind of how you work. So that's a really interesting point as well. I think maybe we have time for another question before we might just move to Q&A. But I suppose, I might just ask then, I suppose, how, what advice would both of you give, say, when people are applying for graduate roles or entry roles in the sector, in the nonprofit sector? What advice would you give to help their applications stand out?
I think the biggest one for me was, when you have found the nonprofit you're applying for, don't just have a general CV for everyone. I think to definitely personalize it and, read the website inside and out. Don't, I feel like, go into the interview knowing as much as you can know about the organization, even from the recent fundraisers they have. And also volunteer work. Like if you don't have much volunteer work on your CV now, I would say, look somewhere. There's plenty you can do even in a pandemic. There's plenty you can get involved in, and even just reaching out to people and asking, what the work is like as well. Because I feel like, especially when I came into Blossom, I'm still learning continuously. And I feel like, there was a lot more that I could have done in some ways and could have learned about. So I feel like, yeah, to stand out, I think definitely just know the organization inside and out, make sure you have volunteer work, and also just be truthful. I think people can tell very easily when you're not being truthful about how passionate you are about an organization. And when you are, I think it really comes across as well. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Emily. And I suppose, Emma, would you have any tips for people how they can stand out when they're applying?
Yeah, it's some of the stuff is probably seems really obvious, but I mean, I'm on interview panels and I go through CVs. I did it bar concern. I've done it in every organization, and then I do it for Helium. I'm on the board of. So the first thing is with your CV, actually pay attention to the role and the job spec, and check your CV and make sure that the job spec and your CV actually align. It's the most obvious thing. If you're also trying to do that, look up what that role entails on Google, maybe look up Glassdoor, depending on the size of the organization, but have a really clear understanding of the role you're applying for and what is actually involved. And again, it's coming back to that core competency, and demonstrate those core competencies on the CV. It's really, really important, because the amount of times that I've gone to CVs and they literally have no demonstrable, transferable skills. So even if you haven't worked in a charity or you haven't worked in the specific role, if your other roles can be demonstrated that they can align with transferable skills and competency, then you'll get an interview. If they want a cover letter as well, it can be like half a page, maybe a page, depending on the amount of experience. But again, it's that structure of understanding what a role entails, being able to demonstrate effective skills that you have. Specifically, if you do have examples, and Emily's right, this is where the likes of interning or volunteering comes in really handy if you haven't got any significant work experience, where you can actually demonstrate things you wouldn't demonstrate in a CV. And then when you go into the interview, I would agree, you can very easily see through people. It's not really just the passion, and it depends maybe on an organization what they're looking for. I will be looking for somebody that's, reliant, is truthful, absolutely, for sure. But sometimes you will get people that will quote like textbook theory at you, of really high level stuff, but they have no experience to back it up. So just be careful when you're doing your interview prep and you're looking at what a role entails. Just because you might be able to throw out the jargon, be prepared that the interviewer might actually then drill in and really try and pull it out of you to see, do you actually know what you're talking about, or pin you down. So just have things prepared. The other thing I would say then for interview, what's really handy, some places will look for it, but most places, in my experience, don't. It's called the STAR method. Now, I can't remember, Adrian, you probably know about the STAR method, but you give people a story where there's actions that were taken and assessment tasks and anything you'd learned from it. So even if you're asked about something where Adrian was asking me where there was challenges, I would be honest. I wouldn't say, oh, I'm too much of a perfectionist. I'd give a real challenge or an issue, and I would show what I'd learned from it and how I'd implement it the next way. And then just, your complete research on the charity, maybe on competitors, those types of things make you really, really stand out. And people are then very eager to get to know more about you.
Yeah, that's all really great advice. I think between, kind of maybe tailoring the CV a bit, depending on the roles, that it's, not kind of not totally unrelated or kind of generic looking. Like Emily said, then, try to build up your voluntary experience, because in particular for the nonprofit sector, that does really, help to kind of stand to people and stand out at that kind of entry point when you're looking at grad roles. And like Emma said then as well, in terms of, identifying transferable skills, even if you've worked, part-time in a shop or a cafe, that's stuff that you can use in the interview to talk about time management, relationship management skills, because anyone who's worked in retail or in hospitality knows that you have a lot of challenging situations like that. So, even transferring those to be able to talk about in your interviews is fantastic. So I think we should have maybe a couple of minutes there for some Q&A. So Pierce is just going to come back in there now.
Yeah, look, guys, thanks very much. Really appreciate that, Adrian, and especially, Emily and Emma, for sharing your stories and your experience, both, unique paths into the sector and into the industry, and it's good to, lots of advice there I think students can relate to and take on board. We've time for I think one quick question, which I'm going to put to you, Adrian, because I think it encompasses a lot of what kind of people are asking. And Emma and Emily, you actually answered a lot of the questions that have come in, through your experiences. So there's a question here, Adrian, that appears a lot, saying, I'm studying science, I'm studying economics, I'm studying finance, but I'm now have to listen to this. Maybe this is a sector I'd like to go into. What advice would you have for people who maybe think they don't have a degree or they're not currently studying something that directly relates to the sector?
Yeah, so I suppose there's maybe two ways that I'd answer that. So one is that the sector is very, very large. So there's something like, I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's over 150,000 people are actually employed in the nonprofit sector. And out of those, out of all those people working in it, you do have people within, say, for example, finance departments, you've people in research and policy, you've people in advocacy. It's really, really, there's so many areas in terms of career paths within the sector that it's incredibly broad. So for people who've maybe not studied things that like social science, for example, would be a very common background for people within the sector, but you don't have to have done that to get into it. And oftentimes, what's kind of really key for us and important at the entry point, at the grad point, it's more about the kind of skills that people have developed wrapping around their degree. So both Emma and Emily have referred to the soft skills there a lot. So things like communication skills, presentation skills, all of those things are really important. And you'll actually find that there's a lot of people in the nonprofit sector who would have studied maybe, for want of a better term, more vocational things. Like, I know someone who works as head of programs in an advocacy organization, and she studied building surveying as her undergraduate degree. So I think, when you're applying for stuff, it's really for us what's important. And in the for purpose program, even, it's not so much maybe about what someone has studied, but it's about the stuff that wraps around it. So say, for example, have they done a bit of voluntary experience? If they have that, fantastic. Are they able to demonstrate an interest in the sector, in their application and in the organization? And if they have the other kind of things, in terms of the soft skills to wrap around that, if someone has studied, science or finance or whatever, even if it's, not directly related to the role, if it's a fundraising role, then we'd still like to, be interested in speaking to them in that case. Because for roles like fundraising, like fundraisers come from all kinds of backgrounds as well. They don't necessarily come from a set kind of degree or background. So I wouldn't let it put you off, basically, if you're not after kind of coming from what you might think is a traditional background for the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, that's a really, really good answer, Adrian. It encompasses a lot of the, the questions that we had there, and just I think sums up that there's loads of different paths into the sector. There's not just one way into it, which is good to hear. So thank you again, guys, for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Some really good practical advice and good insights there, and we dispelled a lot of myths as well, I think. So just remember to everyone watching that, of course, like all the other seminars, this will be available on demand, so you can watch it again back through on the platform. And please join us for our last and final session, which is taking place in about 5 minutes' time, 10 to 4, which is with Marie Kilty, who is an IT Careers Officer at TU Taylor, and we'll be talking about how to create a winning CV and how to stand out from the crowd. So thank you to the guys again, and see you all soon.
Thanks, William Pierce. Thanks, Emma and Emily.
Thanks.